The storm had swallowed the Montana woods in white silence. Inside a lonely cabin, a retired Navy SEAL sat by the dying fire, the only warmth left in a life gone cold. Then it came. A long, aching howl cut through the blizzard, not fierce, not wild, but broken. He froze, listening. That sound wasn't just a cry. It was a call for help. Wrapping his coat tight, he stepped into the storm, his boots sinking deep into the snow. Each echo of the howl led him deeper into the dark pines, where something, or someone, was waiting to be found. What he discovered out there will make you believe that even in the coldest night, miracles still find their way to the lost. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. The Montana wilderness lay under a heavy quilt of snow. The pines bowed beneath the weight of it, and the air hung still, brittle as glass. It was one of those winter nights when the world seemed to hold its breath. In the middle of that vast silence stood a small log cabin, half buried in drifts, smoke curling weakly from the chimney. Inside, a single lantern burned low, its light trembling across the wooden walls. Logan Hayes sat in the corner beside the wood stove, his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the orange glow that flickered against the iron door. He was 38, broad-shouldered but lean, his body carved by years of military precision and hardship. His short, dark brown hair, streaked faintly with gray, clung damply to his forehead. A trimmed beard shadowed a face lined by wind and memory, the kind of face that looked older when he wasn't smiling, which was most of the time. His steel blue eyes, sharp yet distant, carried a fatigue that no sleep could fix. The room around him was neat in the way soldiers keep things, everything folded, squared, placed with purpose. Yet the silence inside the cabin wasn't peace. It was a heavy living thing, pressing on his chest. On the small table beside him lay a worn dog tag and an old photo. 5 men in Navy SEAL uniforms, their arms slung around each other, sand behind them, sunlight in their faces. 4 of them were gone now. The 5th sat alone in a cabin in Montana, trying to forget the world that wouldn't let him. The storm outside had been building since dusk, a restless, howling beast clawing at the roof. Logan's hands, rough and scarred, moved absently as he fed another log into the fire. He had grown used to the sound of wind. Out here, far from anyone, it was his only companion. It filled the nights like ghosts whispering just beyond the door. But tonight, the wind carried something different. At first, it came softly, almost mistaken for the creak of a branch, a long, mournful cry that rose and fell against the storm. Logan's head lifted. He waited. The wind gusted again, and this time the sound returned. Clearer, aching, desperate. It wasn't the cry of the wind at all. It was alive. He stood slowly, instinct tightening in his chest. The soldier in him, the part trained to recognize distress, came alive before the man could think. He crossed the room, opened the heavy cabin door, and was met with a wall of white. The wind roared in, biting through his flannel shirt. For a moment he hesitated, the warmth of the fire tugging at his back. Then another cry split the night, faint, pained, close enough to pierce the quiet like a plea. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing his coat from the hook. It was an old military parka, olive and faded, patched at the sleeves. He slipped on his gloves, pulled the hood over his head, and stepped into the blizzard. Snow swallowed his boots with each step. The forest beyond the cabin loomed dark and shifting, branches heavy with frost. He moved carefully, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through flurries that danced like ash. Each gust carried that sound again, a broken howl, then silence, then another, weaker this time. As he trudged deeper, memories pressed against the edge of his mind. Nights in deserts and jungles, where screams and silence both meant danger. His breath clouded in front of him, and beneath the layers of snow and solitude, something stirred. That old, unwanted feeling of purpose. The sound led him to a small clearing, where a fallen pine had formed a shallow hollow. He lowered the flashlight and froze. There, half buried in snow, lay a German shepherd. Her fur was matted with ice, the black and tan pattern dull beneath frost. One of her front paws was twisted awkwardly, and blood had dried dark against the white. She lifted her head weakly when the light found her, her amber eyes glassy but aware. When she saw him, she didn't snarl. She whimpered, softly, almost like a question. Logan knelt slowly, the snow crunching beneath his knees. "Hey there," he said, voice rough with the cold. "Easy. It's okay." The dog's sides rose and fell too fast, each breath visible in the frozen air. He reached out a gloved hand, and she flinched, then stilled, watching him. Her body trembled violently, but in her eyes there was no wildness, only exhaustion, and, he couldn't deny it, trust. He slipped off a glove and touched her neck, feeling for a pulse beneath the fur. Warmth flickered there, faint but steady. "You're still with me," he murmured. Snowflakes clung to his beard as he leaned closer. "Let's get you out of here." He lifted her carefully, arms tightening around her frail body. She was lighter than she should have been, ribs too sharp, fur tangled with debris. As he stood, she whimpered again, her head pressing weakly against his shoulder. He started back toward the cabin, his breath heavy, boots sinking deep with every step. The cold bit at his skin, but inside his chest, something else burned. It had been years since he'd carried anything that needed him. When he pushed the door open, warmth flooded around them. He set her gently by the hearth and closed the door against the storm. The cabin felt smaller now, alive again. He wrapped her in a wool blanket, the kind he used during missions, and crouched beside her. Her eyes followed him as he stoked the fire higher, then filled a metal bowl with warm water. She sniffed, but didn't drink. Her breathing came in shallow waves. "You're tough," he said softly, wiping melted snow from her fur. "You've been out there a while, huh?" The dog blinked slowly, as if answering. He noticed a faint scar along her ear, straight, surgical, not from a fight. Maybe she had belonged to someone once. Maybe someone trained her. He knew that kind of loyalty didn't just come from nowhere. Outside, the storm howled against the cabin walls. Inside, only the crackle of the fire and her faint breathing filled the air. Logan leaned back, resting his elbows on his knees, watching her chest rise and fall. She reminded him of another creature, a soldier he'd once pulled from a collapsed building overseas. Same fragile rhythm of life clinging to the edge, same silent plea not to be left behind. He hadn't saved that man, but maybe, just maybe, he could save her. Hours passed before she drifted into uneasy sleep. Logan sat there long after, unable to look away. There was something sacred in that small life, something that reached into the hollow place inside him that even whiskey and isolation couldn't fill. When he finally moved to check the window, dawn was a faint silver line through the trees. The storm was fading. He looked down at her one last time before standing. "You're safe now," he whispered, though part of him didn't believe it. He turned toward the stove, added another log, and sat back in his chair, the exhaustion settling over him like the snow outside. But before he closed his eyes, she stirred. A soft sound, not a whimper this time, but a quiet, rhythmic breath. It sounded almost like trust. And for the first time in years, Logan Hayes let the firelight touch his face and didn't feel alone. The storm had not yet passed when Logan awoke. The gray morning light struggled through the frost-coated window, spilling a dim glow over the cabin's interior. The fire in the stove had burned low, only faint embers remaining, yet the air still smelled faintly of pine and smoke. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then a soft, broken sound reminded him. The whimper of the German shepherd lying near the hearth. He moved closer, his joints stiff from the cold and from the uneasy sleep that had never lasted more than an hour at a time. The dog stirred under the blanket, her ears twitching at his movement. Her fur, once stiff with ice, was now damp and tangled. The wound on her paw had crusted, but she winced when he touched it. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice softer than he expected. She turned her head slightly, amber eyes meeting his. The look in them hit him harder than any memory, a mix of pain, confusion, and the kind of loyalty that survives only through suffering. He tore a strip of clean cloth from an old undershirt, soaked it with warm water, and began cleaning the wound. She didn't fight him. She simply watched, breathing shallowly. "You need a name," he said quietly. "Can't just call you Hey Dog." He studied her face, intelligent eyes, a proud muzzle, a scar not far from her left ear. "Luna," he decided after a moment. "You look like a Luna. Strong. Been through the dark, still shining." When he stepped back, Luna adjusted herself, curling her body closer to the warmth of the stove. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel something close to peace, but it didn't last. Every few minutes, she'd lift her head toward the door, listening to the storm outside, ears pricked. Then she would let out a low, aching whine and scratch the wooden floor with her uninjured paw. The sound dug into Logan's chest like a blade. He tried to calm her, kneeling beside her again, resting his hand on her neck. "There's nothing out there," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Luna whimpered again, eyes fixed on the window. Logan had seen that look before. Not in animals, but in soldiers. The look of someone calling for what they'd lost, knowing it wouldn't come back. He sighed and leaned against the wall. "You and me both, girl," he said under his breath. "You and me both." Outside, the storm deepened. Wind screamed through the gaps in the walls, snow slamming against the windows. Logan built up the fire again, poured himself a cup of black coffee that tasted of smoke and loneliness, and stared at the flames. For years, he had lived like this, quiet, disciplined, haunted. Some nights, he talked to the silence as if it were a friend. Tonight, the silence had found a voice, and it belonged to Luna. By mid-afternoon, the storm had swallowed the woods entirely. Logan couldn't see more than a few feet past the door. He needed help for the dog, but the nearest town was 20 miles away. Still, he tried calling the small veterinary clinic on his old radio transceiver, an outdated piece of equipment he used to contact rangers or passing trucks when his generator died. The signal crackled, then caught. "Golden Meadow Veterinary," came a woman's voice, clear but weary. "This is Dr. Grace Bennett speaking." Logan hesitated for a moment before answering. "This is Logan Hayes. I live up by Elk Ridge. I've got a wounded dog here, German Shepherd. Found her last night in the storm." There was a pause, followed by the sound of scribbling. "Condition?" she asked briskly, but her tone softened when she heard the strain in his voice. "Cold, weak, injured paw. Looks underfed," he said. "She won't drink much. Keeps whining, like she's looking for something." Grace exhaled into the receiver. "If she's been out long, she'll need antibiotics, maybe fluids. I can drive up, but those roads are bad right now. You sure you're up near Elk Ridge? That's not exactly around the corner." "I'll make sure the path's clear," Logan replied. He gave her directions, then shut off the radio, unsure why he felt a strange anticipation he couldn't name. 2 hours later, just as the wind began to ease, a faint rumble echoed through the trees. Logan stepped outside, boots sinking deep into the slush. Through the fog of snowfall, headlights appeared, a small blue pickup struggling up the slope. It stopped in front of his cabin, engine sputtering. From the driver's seat stepped a woman wrapped in a long gray coat, her auburn hair pulled into a messy braid beneath a wool hat. Grace Bennett was in her early 30s, tall and slender, her movements careful but confident. Her pale skin was flushed pink from the cold, and her gray-blue eyes carried the kind of calm born from years of witnessing both suffering and survival. She had the look of someone who had learned to keep going when others gave up, the quiet resilience of a healer. "You must be Logan," she said, brushing snow from her sleeves. Her voice was steady but kind. He nodded. "Come in." Inside, Grace removed her gloves, crouched beside Luna, and examined her gently. "She's beautiful," she murmured. "Older female, maybe 5 or 6. You said you found her in the storm?" "Last night," Logan said, "half buried under a tree. She's been crying since." Grace ran her fingers through the dog's damp fur, checking for injuries. Luna tolerated her touch, though she shivered when Grace pressed near her ribs. "She's dehydrated and terrified," Grace said softly. "She's not just in pain. She's grieving something." Logan frowned. "Grieving?" Grace looked up at him. "Animals mourn, Mr. Hayes, especially ones like her. She's probably lost someone. A handler, maybe pups." Her tone carried quiet authority, but her eyes softened when she saw the flicker of emotion cross his face. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the stove, pretending to adjust the fire. Grace watched him for a moment, sensing the distance he put between himself and the world. She'd seen that same wall in other veterans, men who came back but never truly returned. As she cleaned and dressed Luna's wound, the cabin filled with a fragile warmth. Logan made tea, his attempt at hospitality, and set a mug near her elbow. "Thank you," she said, giving a faint smile. "Most people wouldn't take in a wounded animal during a blizzard." "I wasn't planning to," he admitted, "but she didn't give me much of a choice." Grace chuckled lightly, but the sound faded when Luna lifted her head and stared toward the door again. Then came that sound. A low, mournful whine that swelled into a desperate cry. Logan froze. Grace's eyes widened. "You hear that?" she whispered. The cry came again, not from Luna this time, but from far beyond the cabin walls. A faint, high-pitched yelp carried on the wind. Luna scrambled up, ignoring the pain in her paw, claws scraping the floorboards. She ran to the door, pressing her head against it, barking once. Sharp, frantic, heart-wrenching. Logan's pulse quickened. "That sounded like—" Grace began, but Logan was already reaching for his coat. "Stay here," he said. Before she could protest, he opened the door. A gust of icy air rushed in, scattering embers from the stove. Luna pushed past him, limping into the snow, barking again into the endless white. Logan followed her into the storm, the sound of her cries echoing through the pines. Not random, not wild, but purposeful. Somewhere in that blinding snow, something was answering her call. The snow had quieted by morning, leaving behind a white silence that stretched for miles. The Montana forest looked peaceful now, but Logan Hayes had learned that silence could lie. He stood outside the cabin, the cold biting through his coat, his breath clouding in the brittle air. Luna was pacing near the porch, nose to the ground, tail stiff, the wound on her paw nearly healed, but her spirit restless. She paused every few steps, head lifting, ears pricked toward the forest, as if waiting for an answer only she could hear. Grace Bennett stood beside Logan, her gloved hands shoved into the pockets of her wool coat. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, and her gray-blue eyes studied the snow. She looked nothing like the fragile woman he'd expected when she arrived last night. There was a steadiness in her that came from pain already endured, the kind that teaches a person how to stay standing. "She wants to go," Grace said softly. "She's searching for something." Logan nodded. "Yeah, I think she's been calling them." Grace turned to him, her expression troubled. "You think she had puppies?" He exhaled, a slow fog escaping into the cold. "That's what it sounds like. The way she howls. It's not random. It's calling." He crouched and ran a gloved hand through the snow near the porch. "If they're out there, they won't last long." Grace hesitated, then said, "Then let's go find them." They packed quickly. Logan strapped a small satchel with medical supplies that Grace had brought, a flashlight, and a blanket. The sun, pale and fragile, hung behind a veil of clouds. They followed Luna's lead into the trees, her paws moving with purpose. She sniffed the ground, then darted ahead, pausing every few yards to glance back at them. The forest was a maze of white and shadow. Wind whispered through the pines, scattering powdery snow from the branches. Logan walked behind Grace, watching her steady pace. Despite the rough terrain, she didn't complain. He had noticed that about her, a quiet resilience. She wasn't afraid of discomfort or silence. "You've done this before," he said as they climbed over a fallen log. Grace glanced back with a small smile. "Rescue missions? I used to help with search and rescue for lost pets after storms. My husband and I, we started it together before he passed." Logan didn't respond immediately. He could hear the hesitation in her voice, the tremor of memory she tried to hide. "I'm sorry," he said finally. She shrugged gently. "He was a good man. Worked in disaster relief. Died in a landslide in Nepal. We were supposed to go together, but I stayed behind because our dog was sick. Sometimes I think—" She stopped, then shook her head. "Well, life has its ways of deciding for us." Logan didn't press further. He knew that tone. Grief disguised as acceptance. He'd used it himself for years. They walked in silence for a while until Luna stopped suddenly, nose pressed to the ground. Logan knelt beside her. Tiny imprints dotted the snow, small paw prints, uneven and scattered. He brushed the snow aside, revealing a streak of dried red beneath. "Blood," he murmured. Grace crouched beside him. "It's faint, days old maybe, but it means they were here." Luna began to whine softly, circling the spot, tail low, eyes scanning the woods. Then she moved forward again, her body tense. They followed her for almost half a mile until the forest opened onto a clearing. The snow there was churned and uneven. Logan's sharp eyes caught the outline of tire tracks cutting through the whiteness. Deep grooves leading south. Grace frowned. Someone drove through here recently. Too recent, Logan said, his voice darkening. He walked along the tracks, crouching to study them. Pickup truck. 2 days ago, maybe less. Whoever it was, they stopped here. Grace looked around. Why would anyone drive up this far in a storm? Because they took something, Logan said. Luna was pacing near the edge of the clearing now, barking once, sharply, at a broken fence that marked the start of a private property line. The sign on the post read, Blake Ranch, no trespassing. Grace joined him at the fence, brushing snow off the sign. Blake Ranch, she murmured. I've heard that name. They sell livestock feed to half the county. Logan's eyes narrowed. Yeah. And rumor says Gordon Blake's been fined more than once for trapping wild animals. Guess some habits don't die easy. Grace looked uneasy. You think he took the pups? I think he doesn't care what he traps, as long as it makes him money, Logan replied. He looked toward the ranch, a stretch of land barely visible through the snow, smoke rising faintly from a distant barn. Luna barked again, louder this time, pawing at the fence. Logan's hands curled into fists. Easy, girl, he said, but his own voice was tight. Something inside him, the old part that couldn't walk away from a mission, was waking up. Grace noticed. Logan, she said carefully, you can't just walk onto private land. He turned to her, the cold light catching the hard lines of his face. Those pups won't survive much longer. I can't wait for paperwork. Her breath hung in the air, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Two people who had both lost too much, each afraid to feel again. Then she said quietly, If you're going, I'm going with you. He hesitated, but she met his gaze steadily. The determination in her eyes reminded him of the people he used to serve beside, those who refused to look away when life got cruel. He nodded once. They circled along the property's edge, moving low through the trees. Logan's movements were precise, almost automatic. Grace followed silently, clutching the satchel against her chest. As they neared the barn, Luna froze, ears forward, muscles trembling. From inside came the faintest sound, a yelp, high-pitched and weak. Grace's eyes widened. You heard that? Yeah, Logan whispered. They're in there. He motioned for Grace to stay back, but she shook her head. Together, they crept closer. The crunch of snow muffled beneath their boots. A rusty truck was parked near the barn, the same tire pattern as in the clearing. Logan's jaw tightened. Blake, he muttered. They didn't get closer. The risk was too high in daylight. Luna whined, pulling at the leash as if begging him to go in now. He crouched beside her, stroking her neck. Not yet, he whispered. We'll come back. I promise. It was then Grace noticed the change in him. The man who had been withdrawn and distant the night before now moved with quiet fire. She wondered what story he carried that could make him risk everything for a wounded dog. On the walk back, Logan finally spoke. You asked me yesterday why I named her Luna. Grace nodded. I had a teammate once, he said, voice low. We were deployed in Afghanistan. Name was Sam Luna Dempsey. He was the kind of guy who'd laugh even when bullets were flying. One night, he saved my life. Dragged me out after an explosion. Didn't make it himself. Logan's eyes stayed on the trail. I don't know why I named her after him. Maybe because I couldn't save him, but I can save her. Grace's throat tightened. She didn't answer, but she understood. Sometimes saving something, or someone, was the only way to keep living. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was setting behind the pines, painting the snow in faint gold. Luna went straight to the window, her breath fogging the glass, eyes fixed on the dark outline of the forest. Logan stood beside her, resting a hand on her back. "You're not alone now," he whispered. Then softer still, "I won't let you lose them again." The words surprised even him, the first promise he'd made to anyone since the war. Outside, the forest grew quiet again, holding its secrets beneath the snow. But this time, Logan wasn't afraid of the silence. He was listening. The next morning came gray and windless, the sky the color of pewter. A quiet unease hung over the woods, a stillness that felt too deliberate. Logan Hayes stood outside his cabin, his breath steaming in the cold, eyes fixed on the line of trees that led toward the Blake Ranch. His mind had been turning all night, haunted by the image of those faint tire tracks vanishing into the snow. Somewhere beyond those woods, something was waiting. And it wasn't just Luna's missing pups. Luna paced near the porch, her paws pressing into the snow, ears tilted toward the distance. She was stronger now, though her limp remained faint. Her fur had regained a faint sheen beneath the winter light, and her eyes were sharper, but filled with restless energy. She lifted her head suddenly, letting out a bark that split the stillness, then another. Logan watched her, jaw tightening. "You know where they are, don't you?" he murmured. She barked again, almost like an answer. Inside, Grace Bennett was packing a small satchel, bandages, antibiotics, water, and an old stethoscope that had seen too many rescues. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. She had spent most of the night worrying that Logan would storm off into trouble without thinking. There was something in his eyes, that same faraway look she'd seen in soldiers who never really left the battlefield. She knew it because her late husband Michael had worn it too. He had been a volunteer medic in disaster zones, always the first to run toward chaos. And one day, chaos took him. When she stepped outside, Logan was tightening his boots, his face set in that calm, unreadable focus that unnerved her. "You're going after him, aren't you?" she asked. He looked up, the faint light catching the scar that cut across his jawline. "We can't wait for someone else. Those pups won't last long." "Logan," she said softly, "you can't just walk onto private land. Gordon Blake's not someone who scares easily. He's been fined before, and he doesn't care. But he's dangerous." Logan's lips twitched in something close to a smile. Not amusement, but understanding. "I've met dangerous men," he said simply. Grace sighed, pulling her scarf tighter. "Then I'm coming with you. Someone has to make sure you don't get yourself shot." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, but stay behind me. If this goes sideways, you run." They set out mid-morning, following the frozen trail through the woods. The forest around them was muted. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of snow under boots and the rhythmic pant of Luna's breath. The path sloped downward toward a valley where a large clearing opened up. From there, the Blake Ranch sprawled in the distance, a patchwork of rusted fences, broken tractors, and a sagging barn that looked like it had been built before either of them were born. The closer they got, the more agitated Luna became. She growled low, tail stiff, nose pressed to the ground. Logan crouched, his hand on her neck. "Easy," he whispered. But she wasn't calm. Her hackles rose, and a guttural growl escaped her chest. The sound of recognition, grief, and rage all bound together. Grace glanced at the barn, where faint movement stirred behind the warped wooden slats. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney of the farmhouse beyond. "He's home," she said quietly. Logan's expression hardened. "Good." They approached along the edge of the property, keeping low behind the fence line. The wire was bent in places, the metal frostbitten and rusted. Logan's eyes scanned every inch of the yard. His training was evident. Each step calculated, each glance assessing risk. Grace watched him, realizing she was seeing the soldier beneath the quiet man she'd met just days ago. A shadow appeared by the barn. A man, tall and broad, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. Even from a distance, Logan could make out the heavy shoulders and slouched gait of someone used to manual work. His beard was thick and gray, his face weathered, nose slightly crooked, as if broken long ago. Gordon Blake looked like a man carved from rough wood, built strong, but splintered by years of hard living. He wore a heavy plaid jacket, torn at the elbow, and a trucker cap pulled low. His small, dark eyes scanned the property like a hawk guarding its catch. Logan noted the rifle leaning against the barn wall. "That him?" Grace whispered. "That's him," Logan said. Gordon moved toward a metal cage beside the barn. Something inside rattled. A faint whimper followed. Luna let out a sharp bark that made Grace flinch. Blake froze, turning toward the sound. His eyes swept the fence line. Logan cursed under his breath. "Stay here," he whispered to Grace, then moved forward through the snow, keeping low. But Luna wouldn't stay put. She lunged toward the fence, barking wildly now, claws tearing into the icy ground. Blake's face twisted in anger. "Who the hell's out there?" he shouted, grabbing his rifle. Logan stood then, raising his hand slightly. "Easy," he called out. "Just hear about the dog." Blake squinted, lowering the weapon slightly, but not enough to comfort anyone. "You trespassing on my land, mister?" His voice was gravelly, slurred at the edges with drink. "Just looking for what's ours," Logan said calmly. "You been trapping again, Gordon?" Blake's eyes narrowed. "You watch your mouth. I catch what comes on my land. Ain't your business." Grace stepped forward cautiously, her voice soft. "Mr. Blake, please. We're not here to cause trouble. There's a dog." "I know what damn dog you're talking about," Blake snapped, his face flushing red. "Thing's been prowling my property for weeks. Nearly killed one of my chickens." Logan took a step closer, his voice dropping low. "She was looking for her pups." Something flickered across Blake's face. A flash of guilt, then gone. "Ain't no pups here," he said, too quickly. "Then you won't mind if I look," Logan replied. Blake's lips curled into something that wasn't a smile. "You take one more step, and I'll put you down, like the stray you're chasing." The air went still. Grace's breath caught. Logan didn't flinch. His hand hovered near his side, though he carried no weapon, only the quiet certainty of a man who'd faced worse than this. "You don't want to do that," he said quietly. "Not today." They stood locked in silence until a sound broke it. Faint, pitiful, unmistakable. A high, trembling whimper from the barn. Grace gasped. Blake swore under his breath and turned toward the barn. That moment was enough. Logan moved. He closed the distance in 3 strides, his hand gripping the rifle barrel and twisting it away before the man could react. Blake stumbled back into the snow, cursing, as Logan yanked open the barn door. The smell hit first. Hay, oil, and something sour beneath it. Inside, in the dim light, a small wire cage sat against the far wall. Inside, two tiny German shepherd pups huddled together, their fur dull, their eyes glassy with exhaustion. Grace ran to them, dropping to her knees. "Oh my God," she whispered. The pups whimpered weakly, pressing closer to her hands. Outside, Luna let out a long, broken howl, a sound that carried across the valley, echoing through the frozen air, like grief turned into music. Logan lifted the pups carefully from the cage, their small bodies trembling against his arms. "It's over," he murmured. "You're going home." Behind him, Blake shouted something incoherent, but Logan didn't look back. Grace rose beside him, eyes glistening. "Let's go," she said. As they stepped into the fading daylight, Luna's cries rose again, not of pain this time, but of recognition. The sound rolled through the pines. A mother's call answered at last. Snow was falling again by the time Logan and Grace returned to the cabin. The air bit at their faces, sharp and clean, carrying the faint metallic scent of cold iron. Logan's hands were numb despite the gloves. He clutched the two tiny German shepherd pups close to his chest, their fragile bodies trembling under his coat. Luna trotted beside him, limping slightly, but refusing to fall behind. Her breath came in heavy bursts, forming clouds that vanished into the gray evening air. She knew what he carried. Every few steps, she'd glance up, whimpering softly, as if urging him to move faster. Inside, the cabin glowed with a low amber light. The fire Grace had rekindled before they left still burned, and the smell of pine wood filled the room. Logan laid the pups on a thick wool blanket near the stove. They were pitifully small, no more than 5 weeks old, their fur patchy, their eyes glazed with exhaustion. One let out a tiny squeak, and Luna immediately moved in, her body trembling as she lowered herself beside them. Grace watched silently as Luna began to lick the pups, her movements frantic at first, then slowing, softening. The pups whimpered weakly, then nestled into her chest, seeking warmth. A sound escaped Luna's throat, a low, broken rumble that wasn't quite a growl or a cry, but something ancient, something that spoke of grief undone. Logan sank to his knees, leaning one arm on the floorboards, watching the reunion unfold. The flickering firelight reflected in his steel blue eyes, revealing something almost childlike beneath the hardened exterior: awe, tenderness, maybe even redemption. "They recognize her," Grace whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "They never forgot her," he replied quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Luna curled protectively around her pups, nuzzling them with her nose, licking away the dirt in fear of their captivity. The pups, reassured, began to make small, rhythmic sucking motions, pressing against her side. The sound, that soft primal hum of life, filled the cabin, replacing the wind's mournful howling outside. Grace turned toward Logan. He sat cross-legged by the fire, still wearing his coat, his broad shoulders bent slightly forward, the scar on his jaw catching the light. His expression was distant, as if he was watching something far away. "You spent everything you had," she said softly. $350. That was your rent, wasn't it?" He shrugged. "They needed it more than I did." Grace studied him for a moment. "You could have called animal control, or the sheriff. You didn't have to do this yourself?" Logan gave a small, humorless laugh. "Maybe not, but no one else would have done it fast enough. I've seen what waiting costs." His gaze drifted to Luna and her pups. "You lose too many people in your life. You start to think speed is the only thing that saves anyone." Grace nodded slowly, she understood more than she wanted to admit. After her husband's death, she had learned how quickly a moment could take everything. One missed call, one changed plan. Now, looking at Logan, she saw a man still trapped in his own version of that frozen second. While Luna tended to her pups, Grace knelt beside them, examining each one gently. "They're dehydrated, but strong," she murmured. "I'll make them a mix of warm milk and water. They should recover." Logan watched as she worked, her long auburn braid falling over one shoulder, her hands sure but tender. There was a grace in her movements, the kind born from years of patching up creatures too fragile for the world. "You do this often?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "More than I can count. My husband used to joke that we'd run out of space for strays. Guess I didn't stop even after he was gone." Her tone softened, like a confession spoken to the fire instead of to him. "I'm sorry," Logan said after a pause. "About him." Grace looked up, her eyes reflecting the flames. "I think he'd like to know I'm still helping someone." For a while, they sat in silence, each lost in thought. Luna shifted, curling tighter around her pups, her breathing slow and steady. The fire crackled, throwing shadows on the log walls. Logan leaned back against the table leg, exhaustion creeping in, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The warmth in the room felt different now, not just from the fire, but from the life it contained. Grace finished tending to the pups, then stood and poured 2 mugs of tea from the kettle. "Here," she said, handing one to him. He took it with a quiet, "Thanks," his fingers brushing hers briefly, a small, human touch that startled them both. Grace looked away, cheeks warming, and sat across from him. "I used to think I was done saving things," Logan said suddenly. "When I left the Navy, I swore I'd never put myself in another situation where I could lose someone again. But then," he gestured toward Luna, "she wouldn't let me keep that promise." Grace smiled gently. "Maybe it's not about saving others. Maybe it's about saving yourself." Logan looked into the fire, letting the thought settle. For the first time in years, it didn't sound impossible. As the evening deepened, the wind outside softened into a lullaby. The pups slept, their tiny chests rising and falling in rhythm with their mothers. Luna, exhausted but content, rested her head on her paws, eyes half closed. Occasionally, she'd emit a low, satisfied rumble, a sound of peace. Grace gathered her things, preparing to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said. "I want to check their hydration and make sure Luna's wound doesn't reopen." "You sure you'll make it back down the trail?" Logan asked. She smiled. "I've driven through worse for smaller miracles." At the door, she hesitated, watching him for a moment. "You did good today, Logan," she said softly. "You gave them a home." He looked toward the fire, then back at her. "Guess I did." After she left, the cabin settled into silence again, but it was a different kind of quiet, one filled with warmth instead of emptiness. Logan poured another log onto the fire, then sat down beside Luna. She lifted her head slightly, eyes meeting his. "You're safe," he whispered. Luna's tail thumped weakly against the floor. The 2 pups pressed closer into her fur, one letting out a tiny sigh in its sleep. Logan leaned back, resting his arm on his knee, watching the flames dance. For the first time since his deployment, he felt the corners of his mouth lift. The smile was small, hesitant, but real, a flicker of light after a long night. Outside, snow continued to fall in slow, graceful spirals, covering the scars of the day beneath a soft white blanket. Inside, beneath the amber glow, A broken soldier and a broken mother had found something whole again. Spring had begun to tease the mountains of Montana, though winter still refused to let go. The air carried the faint scent of thawing earth, and the snow around Logan Hayes' cabin had begun to recede, revealing patches of wet moss and stubborn grass. Inside, the fire still burned, but it was no longer the fire of survival. It was one of comfort. The cabin, once filled with silence, now thrummed with life. Luna dozed near the hearth. Her pups, two strong, lively balls of black and tan fur, wrestled clumsily beside her. They were growing fast, their movements more confident, their eyes brighter. Every so often, Luna would lift her head and watch them, her expression a blend of pride and quiet relief. Logan sat by the window, coffee mug in hand, watching the morning fog lift from the valley. His beard had grown thicker, flecked with silver, and for the first time in years, there was something soft in his gaze. He'd begun fixing the fence behind the cabin, patching holes, cutting firewood for summer. Small, ordinary things. But for a man who once lived only through routine and regret, they felt miraculous. Grace Bennett had become a regular presence in his life. She drove up from town every few days, bringing supplies and good-natured scolding. Her auburn hair was usually tucked under a wool hat, strands escaping to frame her fair face. Her blue-gray eyes were kind, but rarely idle. They were the eyes of someone who noticed every wound and refused to look away. That morning, she arrived with a box of medicines and a newspaper folded under her arm. "Your boys are turning into little monsters," she said as she stepped in, smiling when one of the pups tried to chew on her bootlace. "They take after their mother," Logan replied, glancing at Luna, who raised her head as if understanding. Grace laughed, setting down the box. Or maybe their keeper. Her tone lightened the room, but Logan noticed her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Something wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, unfolding the newspaper. "They printed my proposal for the Hope for Strays Fund. Thought maybe that'd help get the community behind it." Logan sipped his coffee. "That's good news, isn't it?" Grace gave a small, humorless chuckle. "You'd think. But half the town thinks it's a waste. Said there are more important things than feeding lost animals. Some even told me to stop chasing impossible miracles." Logan leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. People say things when they've forgotten what mercy looks like. Her gaze softened. "You sound like someone who remembers." Before he could respond, Luna lifted her head suddenly, ears stiff, nose twitching toward the open window. Logan's instincts kicked in instantly. He followed her gaze toward the tree line. Nothing moved, but the forest had gone unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, just that heavy, waiting silence. Grace noticed his change in posture. "What is it?" Logan set down his mug and moved to the window, eyes narrowing. "Something's out there." Luna rose to her feet, growling low. The pups pressed against her legs, sensing her unease. Logan slipped on his coat and stepped outside. The air felt different, heavier. He scanned the woods until he saw it, faint tire marks on the slush-covered road leading up from the valley. His stomach dropped. "Grace," he called, "go back inside." She came to the doorway, concern creasing her brow. "What is it?" "Tracks, truck tires, fresh." Her eyes widened. "Gordon?" He nodded grimly. "He's back." It had been nearly 3 weeks since their confrontation. Logan had assumed Gordon Blake would stay gone after the loss of his illegal catch, and after the warning that followed. But men like Blake didn't surrender easily. Logan felt the old, cold anger stirring in him again, the same instinct that had once made him run toward gunfire instead of away. Grace stepped closer, her voice firm. "We should call the sheriff." He shook his head. "By the time they get up here, he'll be gone. Or worse. You're not going after him alone." Logan didn't answer. He turned back toward the forest, scanning for movement. The sound of a distant engine hummed faintly through the trees. "Get Luna and the pups inside. Lock the door." Grace's heart thudded in her chest. "Logan, please, don't do something stupid. You've got them to protect now." He looked back at her, and for a moment, the walls around him seemed to drop. "That's exactly why I have to do it." He grabbed his rifle from behind the door and started down the path. Grace stood frozen for a second before snapping into action. She ran inside, heart pounding, and grabbed her phone. There was no reception this high up, but she remembered the old ranger station 5 miles down the trail. There was a radio there. Meanwhile, Logan followed the sound deeper into the woods. The snow crunched beneath his boots, the faint smell of gasoline mingling with the cold air. When he reached the edge of a clearing, he saw the truck, an old black pickup, idling near the fence line of the valley. Gordon Blake stood beside it, a cigarette hanging from his lip, rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes dirty. The man looked rougher than before, his face drawn tight with bitterness and sleepless nights. "Well, if it isn't the hero," Gordon sneered as Logan stepped into view. "You cost me a lot of money." "Walk away, Gordon," Logan said evenly. "You're not touching that dog again." Gordon laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you can tell me what's mine? You took what I caught. I'm just here to collect." Logan's grip tightened on his rifle. "You're trespassing." "And you're outnumbered," Gordon said, motioning toward the truck. 2 men emerged, younger, scruffy, both armed with cheap shotguns. They looked nervous, unshaven, like farmhands who'd taken a bad job for quick cash. "You don't have to do this," Logan said to them, voice calm but cutting. "You don't want to die over someone else's mistake." The taller one hesitated, eyes darting to Gordon, but Blake barked, "Shut up and get the cage." At that moment, a sound echoed from the ridge, a sharp siren wail cutting through the still air. Gordon froze. Logan's eyes flicked toward the valley, where faint red and blue lights were weaving through the trees. Grace had done it. Gordon cursed, spitting into the snow. "You called them?" Logan stepped forward. "No, but someone smarter than me did." Before the men could move, the sheriff's truck pulled into the clearing. 2 deputies stepped out, rifles drawn. "Drop your weapons," one shouted. Gordon hesitated too long. Logan's voice boomed behind him. "Don't do it, Blake." The older man turned, just as the deputies closed in. Within seconds, they had him on the ground, cursing and thrashing as his accomplices threw down their guns. Grace appeared a few minutes later, breathless, cheeks flushed from the cold. She had ridden up with the sheriff after reaching the ranger station's radio. When she saw Logan standing there, unharmed, relief washed over her face. "You always have to do things the hard way," she said, half laughing, half crying. Logan exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. "Guess I need someone around to balance me out." As the deputies loaded the men into the truck, Luna appeared at the edge of the trees, her pups bounding clumsily after her. She stopped beside Logan, pressing against his leg, eyes bright with quiet understanding. Grace walked up beside him. Their hands brushed, only for a second, but it was enough. For the first time, the look he gave her wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. The sheriff gave Logan a nod. "You did good, Hayes. Maybe it's time you stopped being alone up here." Logan looked at Grace, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "I'm starting to think so too." The last traces of winter lingered like ghosts among the pines. Patches of snow still clung to the shaded hollows, but the air had changed. Softer, scented with damp soil and new beginnings. A month had passed since the night Gordon Blake was taken away in handcuffs, and the valley had begun to heal. So had the people in it. Logan Hayes stood outside his cabin, sleeves rolled to his forearms, splitting firewood beneath the pale morning sun. The rhythm of the axe, steady, patient, echoed through the clearing. His once gaunt face had filled out again, and though lines still framed his steel-blue eyes, the look behind them was no longer haunted. There was life there now. Luna lounged nearby, stretched out on the thawing earth. Her coat glistened in the sunlight, the golden-brown patches catching every flicker of light. Her two pups, now nearly grown, wrestled noisily beside her, all paws and boundless energy. Logan chuckled under his breath. "You'd think they'd tire eventually," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. But Luna wasn't watching them play. Her ears twitched, and her tail flicked with a calm, protective rhythm. There was something different in her, softer, slower. When she shifted, Logan noticed the gentle curve of her belly. He knelt down beside her, voice low. "You again, huh?" He smiled, rubbing behind her ear. "Guess you've got more fight in you than all of us." Inside the cabin, Grace Bennett was sorting through a box of supplies. Clean towels, small glass bottles of disinfectant, and a roll of gauze. Her clinic had reopened 2 weeks ago, and she'd barely had a moment to breathe. She wore a light flannel shirt rolled at the elbows, her auburn hair tied up loosely, a pencil tucked behind one ear. When she looked up and caught Logan's reflection through the window, she smiled. The kind of smile that came easily now. The new sign above her clinic in town read Hope Haven Veterinary, painted in soft blues and whites. She'd chosen the name in honor of Luna, and maybe, in a quiet way, for Logan too. At first, people had been skeptical, but when she told them the story, the rescue, the reunion, the night the snow carried cries through the forest, hearts began to soften. Old ranchers brought in injured cattle. Families with stray dogs came asking for advice. Donations trickled in. And in that small town that had once mocked her dreams, Grace Bennett's light began to grow again. When she came up the mountain that afternoon, she brought along a visitor, an older woman named Martha Green, one of the first townsfolk to support her fund. Martha was in her late 60s, tall but slightly stooped, with silver hair braided neatly under a knitted cap. Her hands were rough from years of gardening, her face warm with kindness. She had the kind of smile that seemed to make people confess their secrets. "So, this is the famous Luna," Martha said, as she knelt near the dog, her voice carrying the soft rasp of age and laughter. "She's even more beautiful than Grace said." Luna sniffed the woman's hand, tail thumping gently. "She's expecting again," Grace said proudly. "A miracle after everything she's been through." Martha nodded. "Life always finds a way. Sometimes it just needs someone stubborn enough to give it a chance." She looked toward Logan, who stood nearby, his flannel sleeves rolled up, sunlight glinting off the scar along his jaw. And I suppose you were that someone. Logan gave a half smile, modest, but genuine. Just did what felt right. Martha's eyes twinkled. Men who say that are usually the ones who do more good than they realize. The three of them spent the afternoon building a small wooden pen beside the cabin, not much more than a sturdy shelter, lined with hay and blankets. Logan worked with quiet focus, hammering boards into place, while Grace handed him tools. Martha offered commentary, sometimes practical, sometimes teasing. "You two work well together," she said at one point, her tone mischievous. Grace flushed, pretending not to hear. When the pen was done, they stood back to admire it. The snowmelt dripped from the eaves, sunlight spilling over the clearing. Luna wandered inside the enclosure, sniffing the fresh straw, then turned a few circles before lying down contentedly. Her two older pups, big now, their legs awkwardly long, watched from a distance, curious but respectful. As the afternoon faded into dusk, Grace and Martha prepared to head back to town. "You'll call if anything happens?" Grace asked. Logan nodded. "You'll be the first to know." Martha patted Luna's head. "You take care, Mama. You've got a good man watching over you." When they left, the valley grew quiet again, painted gold by the setting sun. Logan sat on the porch steps, watching the horizon glow behind the mountains. He could hear Luna breathing softly from the pen, the steady rhythm blending with the sounds of melting snow dripping from the roof. It was peaceful, a kind of peace he had thought lost forever. Later that night, a storm of spring rain came sweeping through, soft, warm, washing away the last traces of ice. Logan woke to Luna's low whine. He lit a lantern and stepped outside, rain soaking through his shirt. In the pen, Luna was restless, shifting back and forth, panting. He knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy, girl. You've done this before." The pups, her first litter, were sitting near the corner, eyes wide, sensing something sacred was happening. The hours passed slowly, the sound of rain mixing with Luna's labored breathing. Then, just as dawn began to lighten the sky, a soft cry broke the silence. Then another, and another. Logan smiled through the exhaustion. "That's it," he whispered. "You did it." By sunrise, 3 tiny puppies lay nestled against Luna's chest, alive, strong, and warm beneath her fur. She licked each one tenderly, exhaustion melting into calm contentment. The air inside the pen felt almost holy, the smell of straw and new life mingling with the damp scent of rain. Logan sat just outside, leaning against the wall, drenched, but smiling. "You've done it again, Luna," he said quietly. "You didn't give up." The morning light spilled across the clearing, touching the trees, the cabin, the pen, and the man who had finally found his way back to the living. A year had passed since that spring morning when Luna's second litter opened their eyes to the world. The valley had changed with the seasons, but what bloomed there was more than flowers or grass. It was purpose. The cabin on the ridge no longer stood alone. Nearby, 2 additional wooden structures had risen, their roofs glinting under the Montana sun. One served as a training shed, the other as a small infirmary for rescued animals. Hand-carved above the entrance was a sign that read, "Hope Haven Rescue Center." Logan Hayes stood in the yard as dawn spread across the mountains, the soft orange light brushing against his weathered face. He looked stronger now, still broad-shouldered, still marked by the faint scars of his past, but his posture had changed. No longer a man weighed down by ghosts, he carried himself with quiet certainty. His beard was trimmed neatly, his dark hair touched with gray. Beside him trotted Luna, her coat sleek and bright, eyes alert with the calm wisdom of a leader. Her pups, now grown into muscular young dogs, circled nearby, tails wagging eagerly. Each of them had been trained under Logan's steady hand. Some learned to track lost hikers, others to comfort veterans struggling with the silence after war. The sound of barking filled the morning air, not wild, but disciplined, like a song of renewed life. From the porch of the main cabin, Grace Bennett watched the scene with a faint smile. She wore a light denim jacket over a pale green shirt, her auburn hair loose today, catching sunlight like copper. A year had softened her too, not in strength, but in peace. Her veterinary clinic had merged with the rescue project, now standing as both a shelter and a sanctuary for those who came seeking more than medicine. Logan turned toward her as she descended the steps. "You're up early," he said, voice carrying a warmth that had once been rare. She handed him a thermos of coffee. "Old habits. There's a new case coming in from Helena today, a retired soldier with PTSD. His wife called last night." He nodded, unscrewing the cap. "Another one of us?" Grace tilted her head, watching Luna and her pack chase through the yard. "Maybe one of them will reach him, like Luna reached you." He smiled faintly. "That's the plan." Not far from them, the sound of a pickup engine broke the calm. A dusty green truck pulled up near the gate, and a man stepped out. He was in his early 40s, tall but gaunt, his movements hesitant, as if unsure of his own place in the world. His name was Eli Porter, a former Marine who had been discharged 5 years ago after an IED blast took the lives of 2 of his friends. His sandy blonde hair was cropped short, and his blue eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. His wife, Hannah Porter, a petite brunette with soft features and anxious hands, followed behind him, carrying a worn duffel bag. Grace approached them with her calm, practiced kindness. "You must be Eli," she said, offering her hand. "Welcome to Hope Haven. I'm Grace, and this is Logan." Eli hesitated before shaking her hand, his grip uncertain. "My wife. She said this place might help." His voice was low, gravelly, the kind of voice that carried memories it didn't want to share. Logan stepped forward. "It's not a cure," he said evenly, "but sometimes helping someone else heal helps you too." Eli nodded, glancing toward Luna, who stood watching him from a few yards away. She tilted her head, curious but unafraid. "That's Luna," Grace explained. "She's been through more than most people. Lost her pups once, nearly lost herself. But she found her way back." Eli crouched slowly, extending a hand. Luna walked forward, sniffed, and then, with a gentleness that surprised him, pressed her muzzle into his palm. Something flickered in his expression, a quiet break in the armor. Hannah's eyes glistened. For the rest of the morning, Logan worked with Eli in the training yard. They practiced simple commands, hand signals, calm breathing, controlled focus. Luna and one of her grown sons, Scout, mirrored the man's movements, responding to his gestures. When Eli faltered, Luna nudged him softly, patient and persistent. By midday, he laughed, a small, rusty sound that startled everyone, including himself. Grace watched from the fence, arms crossed loosely, her heart full. Over the months, she had seen this happen again and again. Men and women who came broken, walking through the gates hollow-eyed, only to leave with a spark rekindled. The dogs didn't just obey. They reminded them of loyalty, of forgiveness, of the possibility of starting over. That evening, after dinner, Logan and Grace sat on the porch. The valley stretched before them, painted in silver light from a rising moon. Inside the cabin, Eli and Hannah slept in the guest room, while Luna and her pack rested in their kennels, their rhythmic breathing filling the quiet. Grace took a sip of tea. "Do you ever think about that night? The storm?" he asked. She nodded. Logan's gaze drifted to the tree line. "Every day. I used to think it was just chance. Now I'm not so sure." Grace smiled softly. "Me neither. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was a door." He looked at her, the glow from the lantern touching his features. The same strong jawline, the faint scar that once symbolized pain, now just a mark of survival. "Either way," he said quietly, "it led me here." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind through the pines. The air smelled of rain and pine sap, the promise of another dawn. Logan turned the lantern down, letting the night settle around them like a blanket. As dawn came the next morning, a soft gold light spilled across the clearing. Logan opened the main gate and whistled. Luna bounded out first, followed by her offspring, tails high, paws splashing through shallow puddles from the night's rain. They ran toward the forest, their barks echoing faintly through the pines. Grace appeared beside him, still in her robe, hair tousled from sleep. "You're letting them roam?" He nodded, eyes on the retreating pack. "They always come back. They just need to remember where freedom feels like." Luna stopped at the edge of the forest, turning her head for a single moment. Her golden eyes met his, steady, proud, full of trust. Then she disappeared into the green, leading her family toward the light-dappled woods. Logan stood there for a long time, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We both found our way home." Grace placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but certain. Together, they watched the first rays of sunlight break through the tall pines, scattering gold across the valley. The storm that had once brought them together was long gone, but its echo remained, not in fear, but in faith. The kind of faith that said miracles didn't always arrive loud or grand. Sometimes they came quietly, on four paws, through snow, and into the hearts of those willing to listen. In the end, this story isn't just about a man, a woman, or a dog. It's about the quiet miracles that God still places in our path, even when we've stopped believing they exist. Sometimes He doesn't send us angels with wings, but a faithful heart wrapped in fur, a gentle soul who reminds us that love can rebuild what loss once destroyed. In every act of kindness, in every life we choose to protect, He is there, whispering that it's never too late to begin again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Leave a comment about the miracle that changed your life, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of God's grace in the smallest corners of this world. May He bless you, protect your loved ones, and fill your days with compassion that turns ordinary moments into living miracles.